Hey, I'm Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company, and this is episode 25 of Goulet Q&A, where I answer questions that you have given me through many of my media channels here, usually related to a specific topic. Sometimes it's just an open forum style questions, but this week is focused on Noodlers. The pens, the ink, you name it. Noodlers is a pretty popular brand in the fountain pen world. Mostly because the founder, Nathan Tardiff, is a rather outspoken individual, does a lot of things on his ink bottles and stuff like that that are mildly controversial, so it gets talked about a lot. The ink colors he has are quite dramatic and has a lot of crazy properties and stuff like that. Has developed a flex nib pen that is incredibly affordable, really made a splash in the pen world in that way, and it's a brand that gets talked about a whole lot. And so I kind of knew that I was going to be diving into the deep end here when I started soliciting questions for Noodlers, and I really did get thrown in the deep end. So you'll have to forgive me. I got a lot of questions, way too many for me to answer in even a couple of Q&As. I got, about 50 different questions. Some of them were just so specific about troubleshooting an individual pen that I'm not able to address it in a specific enough way in this style of format. So you'll have to forgive me if I'm kind of glossing over some of the details of, troubleshooting pens and stuff like that. But because I did get a variety of questions about troubleshooting the Noodlers pens, I can kind of give some general feedback about steps to take there. So if you have a problem with your Noodlers pen, the first thing to do is to clean it thoroughly, okay? Because the way that those ebonite feeds are cut, most fountain pens these days don't use ebonite feeds. They use injection molded plastic. An ebonite feed is different because an ebonite is a hard rubber material, and in order to cut the feed in the slit in the tine, or not the slit, but the feed channel and the fins and everything, it's mechanically cut, as opposed to an injection molded plastic where there's just a mold and it's stuff, the plastic goes in and it forms exactly what it needs to. The ebonite has to actually be cut, and so it creates debris, and there's machining oils because of the cutting saws and stuff like that. So you really got to clean the feed thoroughly. It can help to actually pull it out, scrub it with a toothbrush, using dish soap and water. That's the first step, and that usually helps a lot of the flow issues, especially impeded flow, so dry writing and stuff like that. And then you want to make sure that you've properly set the nib and the feed back in there. I have a video a while ago that I made like 3 years ago about setting the nib and feed in a Nib Creeper. The concept is fairly similar in the Ahab and the Conrad, but basically it's not that different from setting a regular nib and feed if you have any experience doing that, though because of the low price point of the Noodlers pens, it tends to attract a lot of people who don't have experience with fountain pens. So it's you kind of get this interesting mix of people who've never dealt with pens before but are fiddling with things and don't necessarily know what they're doing and get confused and frustrated, and that's why forums start blowing up, and there's a lot of people that absolutely love and people that absolutely hate these Noodlers pens, and it just kind of goes like that. But that's part of the journey, I guess, for these pens. So that said, you got to make sure they're properly set. I haven't done a good video that shows how to set each of those three pens. If you look at my Goulet nibs video, I've got some good stuff on there about setting, different nibs and stuff like that. So maybe check that out as well. The next thing to do is to try heat setting it. Okay, I just got out a heat setting video like 3 years too late. Should have done this a while ago, but I finally got it, put a lot of effort into it, got a lot of help here from Drew and Tyler and some other folks on my team for input on that. And so definitely check that video out if you haven't seen it yet. It's called Heat Setting a Noodler's Ebonite Feed. Okay, it's about as straightforward as you can get as far as the title goes. So go and check that one out. I specifically wanted to get that video posted this week because I knew I was going to be addressing Noodlers pen questions in the Q&A. So definitely watch that video. It explains why you need to heat set sometimes, the issues that it can resolve, and how easy it is to actually do it using hot water. So that is very good. And then if you have a pen that you've done all that and you still are frustrated, email orders@gouletpens.com. We'll do our best to help you out. Okay, so I've got a whole bunch of questions laid out here. I'm going to answer them to the best of my knowledge. Some of them were outside of what I knew, either from stuff that required, stuff that was kind of reaching out into more like how Nathan thinks and stuff like that, or about, basically you know, stuff that I just was not comfortable being the authority answering. So I actually did speak with Nathan earlier in the week about, you know, how I was going to be doing this video and soliciting some questions and stuff like that. I was not able to coordinate my schedule with his to be able to talk with him about these questions for this week. It just didn't end up happening. So, but he is willing to do that. So if I'm able to, in the next week, to get a hold of him and maybe get a recording or something, if he's cool with that, I'll try and have like an audio recording where I'm asking him some of these questions. So some of the more difficult questions that require his expertise, I've put off until possibly next week. It's all dependent on his schedule. So that said, I'm going to answer everything to the best of my ability for this week, and then I'm going to plan on kind of making a part 2 Noodlers video if our schedule ends up working out there. And then that's what I'll do. For those of you that don't know, Noodlers as a brand essentially is Nathan Tardiff. He makes all of the ink himself by hand, all of it, the entire brand. It's incredible. And then all of his pens, he designs them all, coordinates all the manufacture. He doesn't do all the parts of the manufacture. He doesn't have like, you know, pen making stuff in his house or whatever, but he coordinates all of that stuff with parts from all over the world, and that is a tremendous effort, believe me. So what actually ends up happening is usually have like a swing between, you know, a lot of pens that'll come out, and then the ink will kind of dry up and we'll start to run out, and then, you know, he'll swing over to ink, and then we'll have ink for a while, and some of the pens will start to run out, and that's just, the man seriously works like 20 hours a day. It's insane. He drinks a lot of coffee, which is why his hands kind of shake in some of his videos. He's just, you know, running on full bore here. So anyway, that's why it's so hard for me to coordinate a schedule with him, because he really just works more than anyone else that I know. It's kind of insane. And he does it all himself. So whenever I talk to him, I'm taking time away from ink or pens being made. So I try to be really sensitive about when I reach out to him. I want it to be as organized as possible. Wasn't able to coordinate that, but I'm going to see if I can do that for next week. But don't hold me to that just in case I'm not able to. But anyway, so I do have a whole bunch of questions. I got 26 questions that I have laid out for this week. Honestly, I've only got about an hour worth of battery life on my camera, so that'll be my hard cutoff for this week. So I'm just going to answer the questions as quickly and as thoroughly as I can, as concisely as I can, and then if I start to near towards the end, I'll have to skip over a couple. But you know, if I didn't answer your question, I'm really, really sorry. It's getting to the point where I'm getting so many questions, I have to cut them down at some point. So thank you for asking questions, and if you didn't get it answered, just know that, you know, it's not that I don't like you or something like that. It's that I have to cut it somewhere. So the first question I have is at Geeko Supremo on Twitter. Said, how bulletproof is Noodlers Black? After it's dry, could I go over it with watercolors? Noodlers Black is pretty darn waterproof. I actually have a full review of Noodlers Black. You can see it on InkNouveau. And that I did a drip test and a smear test and stuff, and it didn't move at all. Now that said, it will depend on the paper. Specifically, if you're doing like watercolor washing, and like, you know, typically that's done on a very ink resistant paper, very thick stuff like watercolor type paper. The way that Noodlers inks work, the permanent inks, they're cellulose reactive, so they actually bond to the cellulose in the paper, and that's how they create their permanent bond. If you have a paper where it's heavily sized or coated and it's not able to get down and penetrate into the fibers of the paper, then you're going to have some ink that's left on the surface, and that part may wash away. So, you know, a lot of people will hear really good things about the permanence of Noodlers Black or some other Noodlers ink, and then go and put it into an extreme situation with a heavily coated paper, do some washing over it, and see some colors run and get really upset about that, and then it kind of creates a little battle. But understand that's what's happening. So if you have a really slick paper or heavily coated paper and you're washing over it and you're getting a little bit of color running, that's why. So you can let it sit for a longer period of time and it'll give it more time to soak into the paper. But when a lot of people are watercolor washing, they don't want to wait a day or 3 days or 5 days in order for that to happen. So when that kind of situation happens, typically the artists that I know will switch over to a pigmented ink like platinum carbon black. That's kind of like the go-to washing black that a lot of people like to use. So there's my answer for that. Wildman on InkNouveau, you asked, has Mr. Tardiff announced anything new for 2014? I actually had a couple of people ask me about new stuff, and I'll be honestly, I have no idea. You know, Nathan is a bit of a wild card sometimes. He seriously is like a mad scientist. You know, he's an eccentric genius. He just is working on a lot of different things at one time. Who knows what he's actually going to come out with? There have honestly been times where he's come out with stuff, and we have not found out about it here at Goulet until he posts a video on YouTube, and we're like, what is this? We had no idea this was even coming, and we have to call up in a meeting and we're like, how can we get this ink? What is going on? You know, that kind of thing. So honestly, I never really know. You know, sometimes he'll say ahead of time if something's coming out, especially, you know, the inks that we've collaborated with him, we've obviously known ahead of time when that's coming. But, you know, he's just very limited on time, and so it's kind of like when he has a burst of energy and has the time to finish up a little project that he's nearing towards the end, all of a sudden something will be ready that he's been talking about for years. So I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out with a new ink or two. You know, that seems to be, you know, fairly regular. Every, you know, year he comes out with a couple of inks, just kind of on a whim. Or what seems to be on a whim. He actually takes a lot of time to develop his inks, but he's definitely going to be coming out with new pen colors, I'm sure, between the Nib Creeper, the Conrad, the Ahab. You know, he's coming out with new colors all the time. He's mentioned before how he has at least 200 different colors that he could do at any one time. It's just a matter of, you know, his supply and what he decides to come out with and his naming and all that kind of stuff. And another thing is, you know, somebody asked specifically about the Neponset. That's a pen that he showed in a video that was for the 2013 Noodlers art contest that he showed there. That pen has been in the works for a while. It's like a Mont Blanc 149 size pen, really big pen. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes out at some point. I don't really know when that's going to be ready, but I know he's been working on it for a while. And the fact that he used it in the art contest, and I think he kind of mentioned March as a time for when he kind of wanted to wrap that up. Maybe we'll see that, I hope, but it all depends just because he's one guy and it depends on what kind of time he's got. So that's about all I know, but who knows what's going to come out. Shawn J on Facebook said, clogging with bulletproof and clogging with bulletproof and higher inks. I get 3 to 4 times longer flow with nano carbon ink than with any bulletproof, eternal, and similar Noodlers inks. I think the carbon ink, nano or carbon, you're referring to like the Sailor nano inks, or the carbon would be, you know, like Sailor or Platinum has pigmented inks, basically. Is that something that I just have to live with? That's going to depend on a lot. It's going to depend on which ink you're talking about, because not all the Noodlers bulletproof or eternal inks are the same. The ones that are labeled as eternal, I find tend to write a little drier, tend to have a little more clogging kind of stuff that can go on. The bulletproof ones really kind of vary based on what ink you're talking about, you know, whether it's a polar ink or something like Kung De Chang or Noodlers Black. The biggest problem with Noodlers is that the chemical properties of each of these inks can vary so much that it's hard to make a blanket statement about, oh, all Noodlers bulletproofs. There are going to be some components of those inks that are similar and have some similar properties, but you know, you really just can't make a blanket statement about much of anything with Noodlers, because Nathan just creates these kind of crazy formulas and stuff, and some of his inks honestly take 6 months to make. You know, like I know Dragon's Napalm is one that has an incredibly long process, and Kung De Chang, I think, also has a really just arduous process. It uses all kinds of different chemicals and stuff like that to actually create the effect that it has with those inks. So it's going to depend a lot on the ink. It's going to depend a lot on the pen, how prone the pen is to drying out. One thing I will say is that the Noodlers inks specifically tend to be highly saturated, like basically saturated to the absolute peak of what the water is able to hold in terms of the dye. So part of the reason that you run into some clogging issues and stuff on some of these pens, it's not a true clogging like the pen is actually getting jammed up and ruined or anything like that. If you wash it out, it'll go away. What's happening is that the ink is so saturated with dye that when you get water evaporating out of the ink, and then it leaves a lot of dye, like too much dye, left in the pen, and the dye is very dry. It's drier than the water, so it can actually create a flow issue in the pen because it doesn't create the proper capillary action. So if you reconstitute it with water, it'll flow back through. So that's what happens. So if you dilute it, that'll help a lot. Usually you can dilute the ink about 10% or so and not see any ill effects of that. And I've got some other questions about diluting here, so I won't go too much into that, but that can help a lot. Heather P on Facebook says, as a fountain pen newbie, what's the one thing I should know about Noodlers. Oh boy, there's just so many things. I think there's a lot of people that would, if they had to sum up Noodlers into one thing, you'd see a whole gamut of different responses that people might have. But I actually wrote something down here, but I've kind of already alluded to something. Probably if there's one thing you have to know about Noodlers, it's that Noodlers is really made by one guy, Nathan Tardiff. It's like very much stamped with his personality, what he wants to do. He is a values-driven man, that he makes products based on what he believes, not based on markets or what he wants to sell or profits or anything like that. He is running his business based on a belief. And so that is why it tends to be so controversial, because those who don't believe what he believes will absolutely hate him, and those who do believe him absolutely love him, and it creates this really interesting environment in the fountain pen world. But I would say, if there's one thing you have to know, whether you love it or hate it, the fountain pen world would not be the same without Noodlers and Nathan Tardiff. And I think just about everybody could say that. Fred, in an email, said, about Noodlers, which models do not have the smell, so I may buy some? And how do I get rid of the smell if they do? So I don't actually know whether you're talking about the ink or the pens, Fred. You weren't specific about that. So about the ink, there's nothing you can do to get rid of the smell of that ink. There are some interesting smells in some of these inks because of some of the permanent properties and stuff. Pretty much, I will say that pretty much every permanent ink I've used from any kind of brand will have some kind of interesting smell. A lot of inks that aren't permanent will have interesting smells too. When it comes to ink, you're just going to have to kind of deal with it a little bit. I just realized I don't have my little timer. There we go. So, as far as the ink, if you are asking about the ink, I can't really help you there because there's nothing you can do about it, except just get used to it. When it comes to the pens, okay, so the Nib Creeper, the Ahad, and the Conrad, the standard pens, they are going to have a smell. So they're a cellulose derivative. They do have a rather pungent smell to them. It's just the material that they're made out of. It is a smell that's stronger when they're new. The smell will dissipate a bit as the pen has time to air out and off gas and stuff like that. It never really goes away 100%. You can scrub it and you can do whatever you want, but it never really goes away 100%. You just have to kind of deal with that. Some people can't deal with that and they hate it and they don't like it for that reason. But that's what it is. The reason that Nathan uses that material is for a lot of different things. The environmental aspects of it, he's mentioned before that in some of his materials and stuff that it is decomposable, but it's not anything you should be worried about. It's not like it's going to decompose sitting on your desk. It's like if you leave it in a compost pile, it'll decompose after like 2 years or something of being in a decomposing environment. Decomposing environment. But then, it's going to be fine just on its own. It'll last forever unless you throw it in a compost pile. Not forever, I shouldn't say that. But so the Noodlers, the Conrad Ebonite pens, they smell like ebonite. They smell like hard rubber or like burnt rubber, I guess. It has a very ebonite is a very specific smell, and that smell a lot of people actually find very appealing. It's one of the positive aspects of ebonite for a lot of people. And that smell doesn't really go away either. It's just the material itself. That's how it smells. The Conrad acrylic smells ever so slightly. It's acrylic acetate. That's what that material is made of. That's an acrylic material that a lot of companies use. A lot of Edison pens, Monteverde. Actually, just pretty much any other fountain pen company, if you see an acrylic plastic kind of thing, unless it's an injection molded plastic, it's going to be acrylic acetate for the most part. If you see any pens where it's got a lot of pearlescence and swirls and stuff like that, it's usually acrylic acetate, and it's going to have a very similar smell. It's a very slight smell though, and that's usually worse when it's new and tails off a lot as it ages. But it's not nearly the pungent smell as the regular Noodlers pens. The Noodlers rollerball pen doesn't smell. That's a different kind of plastic, and it doesn't smell at all. So there you go. I hope that's what you were asking about. Gina S. on Facebook, I have a clear demonstrator Nib Creeper and the barrel has stained an awful yellow color. I've tried using vinegar, bleach, and denture tablets on it. Nothing has worked so far. Do you have any suggestions? Yeah, this is weird. Like I've had this happen to one other person before, and it was a couple of years ago. It's not a common occurrence. The only other time it happened, this is the kind of thing like I don't know what ink you have used that it's happened. The one that I saw that it happened to was someone had used Wildman Sepia, which is a Noodler's ink. but it's a really kind of an interesting ink. They use it in I believe it was a demonstrator Nib Creeper, a clear one. And it had kind of stained the barrel a little bit, and they tried cleaning it with something. I don't remember what it was, but whatever cleaning agent they had used turned the pen like a bright neon yellow inside where the ink had made contact with this cleaning solution. And I have no idea what caused it. Couldn't clean it out, had them send it to me, couldn't figure it out, and I'm sorry about that. So, you know, if it's a pen that you bought from me, maybe we'll replace it and just tell you not to use that ink anymore, or something like that. If you didn't get it from me, maybe reach out to wherever you did get it and see if they can do something. I guess I can try talking to Nathan and see if he has any ideas, but I would really need to know kind of what the scenario was that happened, because it is so rare. Nikesh J on Facebook, I have a brush pen, but the ink won't flow through even after 2 cleanings. Any ideas? Okay, so the brush tip works a little bit different than a fountain pen. It's got the bristle brush, they're nylon bristles. Cleaning the pen, it doesn't flow through quite as easily as it would on a fountain pen. You know, the brush is kind of this, it's not quite like a sponge, but it's a little bit more like that, where there's a lot of ways the ink could go through there. I don't know the situation that you know, the ink won't flow through. I don't know if it's a type of ink that you use, if it dried out or something like that, because I don't have that information. But you can remove the tip out of the feed. So that's the first thing I would recommend. Get it out of there so that you can really get into it. And then you can try to kind of like break it up with your fingers a little bit. That'll help to separate the bristles, and kind of any dried ink or anything that's in there can kind of bust it up. You can soak it in a pen cleaning solution of some kind, you know, maybe like a dish soap or something, or a pen flush might help. And then if it's just unsalvageable, you can get replacement tips. Nathan has a video on how to replace it. It's pretty long and kind of confusing a little bit, but he does have a video on that. So that would be my recommendation if that cleaning won't help. At Pen Ink Chillin' on Twitter said, any plans for a wet noodle flex pen? Wet noodle equals a very flexible nib with a big variation. And you gave me a link to a vintage pen that you got there. I don't know specifically of any plans for new nibs to come out, except that I know that Nathan's been working on a music flex nib. Basically, a music nib is kind of a stub nib with 3 nib tines for increased ink flow. And Nathan has been working on a flexible music nib. He first told me about it about 3 years ago. And last I heard, which was, you know, mid last year, he had gone through something like 56, I think that was the number, 56 different prototypes of this nib. So I know he's bound and determined to make this thing work. I haven't gotten anything firm or official about when that might actually happen. I would have to believe that he's coming on something soon, but you know, at this point it's been so long since he started developing the thing that I'm just going to be patient and wait until he's ready. But that's the only new nib kind of thing that I've heard about. Ann W on Facebook said, I've watched Nathan's video about putting calligraphy nibs in his pens and I can't get it to work. I've destroyed 2 Ahabs so far. How on earth does he do it? I'm really sorry. I honestly don't know. I haven't really messed around too much with that. I know Nathan, part of the reason that he actually came out with his $2, you know, standard nibs is he wanted to undercut the price of like speedball, you know, calligraphy nibs. He wanted the nibs to be so cheap and accessible that you could replace those and all that. Has an interesting way of thinking about things sometimes. But anyway, so yeah, I think he did have a video putting a calligraphy nib on there. If you want to watch a different video, Stephen Brown did a really good one, SBRE Brown on YouTube. He's got a lot of great videos. He did one called Creating Uberflex, in which he took, I think it was a speedball nib, but I'm not 100% sure. No, it might have even been a Browse nib. I don't know. I don't know the type of nib. I watched the video a while ago, but he did successfully put a flexing calligraphy nib on one of his Noodlers pens, and it worked okay. It's not going to write quite like a fountain pen, but he was able to get some pretty incredible flex out of it when he was able to get it to work. So it's going to be a frustrating venture no matter what, because you're really doing a hack putting those nibs on those pens. But you know, if you're really bound and determined, keep at it. But you know, you are kind of pushing the limits there. Rob P on Facebook, the feed on my Ahab Flex pen is always extremely saturated with ink. So much so that if I accidentally brush the feed against my finger or on paper, a huge glob will emerge which stains my fingers and ruins my writing. None of my other pens seem to have this issue. Is this a function of the Ahab pen lineup in general, or is it just my feed? No, that's not how the Ahabs are supposed to be. Sounds to me like you're getting too much air interchanging with the ink on the pen. There's a couple of, there's a couple of things that could make this happen. The opening, the grip on the Ahab is kind of a bit of an oval shape, and that's to be able to fit the nib and the feed in there very securely as you put it in. If it's not properly set in there, if it's in the wrong rotation as you go to put it in, there's going to be way too big of an air channel on the side of the nib and the feed. It's going to look kind of weird because it's not going to be shoved far enough into the pen, but it's also going to allow way too much ink to flow out of there. So that could be a simple issue of pulling the nib and the feed out and setting it back in properly. Watch my Goulet nibs video on that, because I show you how to set the nib and the feed on the Ahab specifically very thoroughly in that video. That would be my first suggestion. If that doesn't do it, or if that's not your problem, I would try heat setting that feed again, because that gushing like that could be an instance of the feed that's not, or that's too far away from the nib. That could have happened over time as you flex the nib. Maybe it was overflexed and bent out a little bit or something, but you can heat set that nib to go back. Or it could have just, been something that wasn't set right from the start. But heat setting is really, really easy. Heat setting Noodler's Ebonite feed. It's a video that I just did this week. Check that out. So there you go. And the last trick I have there that you could try, I don't think it would work in this issue because it sounds kind of extreme, but if you want to decrease the flow, one thing you can do is to put a little bit of silicone grease on the fins of your feed. Not in the channel where the ink actually comes down, because that'll really impede your flow too much. But the fins, the part that's cut around the feed, you can put them on the part that goes into the grip section. If you put some silicone grease in those fins, that will block some of the air channels that will decrease the flow a little bit. Because those fins, what they do is they allow air to flow in as the ink is flowing out. And if you have too much air that's coming into the pen, it's allowing too much ink to come out. So by lessening the air channels in the feed, it slows down the flow a little bit. So there you go, some tips. Stephen C. on Facebook, is there any way for Goulet to order the nondescript preppies used by Noodlers for resale to Goulet customers? So what you're talking about is some of the Noodlers 4.5 ounce inks come with free pens. And they really are free pens. A lot of people think, oh, it's just built into the cost of the thing. Well, yeah, I mean, sort of, but not really, because Nathan had the inks previously that were not with free pens, and he started introducing them with free pens, and he did not raise the price. So they really are free pens. So is there any way for us to get the nondescript ones? Okay, so the Platinum Preppies, that's what they are. For some of them, he has changed some of the pens in some of the 4.5 ounce inks. You'll have to check the gouletpens.com website to see which pens come with which ink, because it does change rather frequently, and I don't want to say definitively what's what in this video because it could change a month from now, or it could have already changed and I'm not aware of certain pens, but we do our best to keep that up to date on our website and to keep pictures and all that kind of stuff. But a number of the inks come with Platinum Preppies that are unmarked. So the regular Platinum Preppies that you can buy, they have the word Preppy written on them and a bunch of Japanese characters and stuff, but the Noodlers ones do not have that. They are just blank. They don't have anything written on them. I believe that Nathan's got some kind of arrangement with Platinum, where he gets those, because I know he's not manually removing all of those, because that would just be impossible. And I've heard of people that can do that, but it's not a foolproof process. So I believe he's got some kind of arrangement where he's getting those from Platinum without the marking on them. That is not something that I have the power to do. So it's the kind of thing that, no, I'm not able to get them. No, Nathan will not sell them. And Platinum does not sell them, to my knowledge, to the general public in that manner. I have heard of some people that have removed those labels. It's actually not something I've really experimented with a lot, because for me personally, it's a $4 pen. I don't sweat it too much, but some people just really want to get that label removed. I forget what chemical it is that people have used I tried to look for it in my email and stuff, and I just could not find it. I think it's rubbing alcohol that people have used. Now, keep in mind, whenever you're using any type of alcohol or anything like that on these brittle plastic, acrylic pens, you do have the potential of actually damaging the plastic and ruining the plastic and ruining your pen. So be careful. Rubbing alcohol is one of the lesser dangerous ones. You never want to use acetone or anything like that on these acrylics. That will literally melt the pen. Experiment. If you've got a Preppy and you just are willing to sacrifice it, try a little rubbing alcohol and try rubbing off that label. You can also sand it off and then polish it up. That's another way to go about it. Christine M. on Facebook said, will Nathan continue to produce the Ebonite Conrads? I noticed the other day that you only have one style left in stock. I snapped one up to avoid missing the boat. Just wondering if we'll see more Ebonite stuff. Yeah, the Ebonite has been very inconsistent supply. Very inconsistent. We've gotten a couple of batches ever of these Ebonite Conrads. Yes, there are going to be more. That's been a production issue, If you look at what most Ebonite pens cost, they're in the hundreds of dollars for any Ebonite pen. So to get any Ebonite pen for $40 is pretty incredible. But then the fact that Nathan's producing them and there's a lot of labor involved with setting the nibs and stuff properly, that has been a lot of the issue. It's this kind of thing we got to sit and wait and just wait for more to come. They haven't been discontinued or anything like that. It's been super, super, super limited in supply. The best thing to do there would be to sign up for our email notification list on gouletpens.com for the individual pen that you're interested in, and then just wait for us to get them in, honestly. And we'll do our best whenever we know we're getting some in. We'll do our best to advertise it that way. Everybody gets a fair shot. But honestly, sometimes we've gotten like 4 of one type of pen before, and we're just not going to blanket advertise, for 4. So the email notification is going to be your best bet. All right, Michael P. on Facebook said, why do I get extremely long dry times at the end of a fill with most bulletproof or semi-bulletproof inks? I'm talking upwards of a half hour or more. The ink will smudge if you run your finger across it. At the beginning of the fill, the ink dries in a reasonable amount of time. This is excluding obvious reasons like evaporation over time. I know you can add water again, but I was just wondering what's going on here. All right, so this is hard to say without knowing more specifically what your situation is, Michael. But there's a lot of different factors that could be here. The specific ink could make a difference. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier about how it's hard to make a blanket statement about a semi-bulletproof or a bulletproof ink, because the properties can vary wildly even among those. So, and without knowing the kind of pen that you're using either, it's really tough. So. I will say that evaporation could be a factor in what you're dealing with here. I don't know what kind of time frame you're talking about for from when you fill the pen. It could be one day, and in the end of that day, that would be a little weird to me. I don't really have an explanation. If you're filling a pen and using it by the time you get to the end of the day, it's writing a lot different. That I would have less of an explanation for. I believe what's probably more likely the scenario is that you're writing with it, and then maybe over the period of several days or a week or something like that, maybe even longer, as you're getting towards the end of the fill, you're having a situation of evaporation over time, not just over the life of the individual converter or cartridge or whatever that you're using. I shouldn't say cartridge because Noodlers doesn't make cartridges, but you could be refilling a cartridge. You know what I mean? So without knowing more, I can't give any specific stuff. I will say that this affects the highly saturated inks more than the more watery ones that you might get from other brands. So if there is evaporation that's a factor, you have less of a tolerance of evaporation with some of the Noodlers inks because they're so heavily saturated with dye. So that is probably what is happening. I'm willing to bet that evaporation is your issue here. It's probably such that you have a dye or have an ink that's so saturated that any degree of evaporation will extend the dry time because that pure dye that's in there will take a long time to dry and smear and stuff like that. But paper is also going to really make a big difference, the type of paper you're using. If you're using a really ink-resistant paper, it's going to be much more likely to smear than that. So I don't know if you're dealing with different papers or if you even considered the type of paper that you're using as a factor, that will make a difference as well. And then the other thing that can make a difference is your hand oil. Like the oil in your hands can actually get on the paper and extend your dry time. So take a little closer look at exactly when those situations are happening. I don't know that it's just the type of ink or the fact it's a bulletproof ink or whatever that is your exact situation. It may be, but based on what I have here, I don't know that that's necessarily just the case. I think you've got evaporation, the paper type, and hand oils that may be a factor as well. Theresa A on Facebook said, what is the best way to get rid of Bay State blue stains on or in a pen, on hands, on clothes, or on the kitchen counter? Well, bleach is what cuts Bay State inks. Bay State inks are formulated very differently from all of the other Noodlers inks. You never want to mix a Bay State ink with another Noodlers ink. You're going to get some crazy reactions. But the bleach will cut right through it. If you're using, dish soap or something like that, it's not really going to do much of anything for you. That's what you'd use, with a conventional ink. But bleach knocks it down. You want to be careful about how concentrated the bleach you're using and what you put your bleach on. You never ever want to put bleach on a nylon carpet because it will literally turn it white. You don't want to do that, or it could turn it orange or something. You never want to bleach any natural materials like any clothing or any like pure cotton clothing and stuff. It'll turn it white. I don't know about color safe bleach. I don't know if that's the same kind of stuff. I've actually never done an experiment with that. That would be curious to know. But the higher the concentration of the bleach, the more effective it'll cut the ink, but it's also the more hazardous it is too. And you never want to mix bleach and ammonia. Let me just say that right now. I know ammonia is a cleaning chemical that a lot of people use in their own formulas and stuff in pen cleaning solutions, and I would not want you to mix bleach and ammonia because it creates a toxic gas. So don't ever mix the two. But a neat little trick for getting it off your hands or on certain surfaces that you want to be kind of safe. Some of the surprisingly best things that I've used have been hand sanitizer and shampoo, actually. Those work remarkably well. And maybe you've noticed if you've ever gotten any like Bay State inks on your fingers, by the time you shower, it's mostly gone or completely gone. So interesting there, but those two things are just some regular household items that tend to work really well, interestingly. Okay, whew. Doing good, Brian. Okay, come on, get a little coffee in me. This is a lot of information, by the way. I don't think you guys realize sometimes how hard. I make notes ahead of time, but even still, it's like firing on all cylinders for, up to an hour here. So anyway, here we go. Robert Ross T on Facebook said, is there any news regarding the Neponset? Looking forward to that pen. Shoot, I kind of answered that question already earlier, but I'll go ahead and sum it up again here. I don't have anything official. I know Nathan mentioned it, and if you go, Ink Need Last Forever is Nathan's YouTube sign name or whatever, his channel name. If you go to the Noodlers 2013 art contest, just type that in YouTube, Noodlers 2013 art contest, you'll see him use that pen in that video. He talks about the art contest. I know at least he had a couple of those pens that he was going to lump into the contest, I believe. I didn't rewatch the video before I mentioned this. I could have done that, but I watched the video like a year ago. If you look at that video, you'll see what pen that is, a big pen. I know that he's had that pen in the works. He's been working on it. So that will be available at some point. I don't have anything official, though, to announce about that. As soon as I do, believe me, I'm going to preach it from the mountaintops. But sorry, I don't have a better answer for you there, but that's all I got. Amber M on Facebook said, what's the nib size in the Noodlers Conrad Flex? I see in the Goulet listing it says steel flexible number 6, but is that equal to an extra fine, fine, medium, etc. nib point? I could probably do a better job of that. I'll revisit some of the descriptions that we have on there just to make sure. It might be on there somewhere, just in a different part maybe. But it's a fine / medium, so it's between a fine and a medium. If you go to the nib nook on Goulet pens, you'll see we have writing samples of all the pens, and you can see there I'm flexing while I'm writing with it, so the line variation is going to vary quite a bit, but you can see and compare that to other nib sizes from other pens that I've done in similar writing samples using that tool, the nib nook. So you also asked, are there replacement nibs available for the various nib point sizes? I very much appreciate the time and effort the Goulet team puts into sharing information with us. Goulet offers customer service like no one else. Woo! Yeah! Thank you. Okay, so yeah, they're fine and medium. They only offer that one size in the flex nib and in their conventional nib. So there is a Noodler's conventional nib that you can get. It's $2. Why not, you know? And you can get that, and it fits the same number 6 size. That's referring to the actual overall size of the nib. That will fit in the Conrad and the Ahab. The Conrad and the Ahab use the exact same nib. And so the Nib Creeper uses a smaller one. So I'm not talking about that one. That one's different. But the Conrad and the Ahab use that nib. It's a fine/medium, somewhere in there. If you want to go with a different size, like an extra fine or a 1.1 stub or, you know, broad or something like that, Noodlers doesn't offer that. So that's part of the motivation I had when developing the Goulet nibs that we get from NouVo in Germany. Very high quality stuff, but you get the full range. You get extra fine, fine, medium, broad, 1.1 and 1.5 millimeter stub. So, and they fit the Noodlers pens beautifully. Look at my Goulet nibs video. Man, I've referenced that video like 6 times in this one. But that would be your option for other nib point sizes. Ray C on Facebook, I read something about Noodlers being a more saturated ink intentionally so that we could dilute it if necessary. This is the question I referenced in the beginning. Okay. Is this true? And if so, are there any specific recipes on doing so? Okay, so that was your first question, Ray. I'll go ahead and answer that. Noodlers actually talks about this on their website. So they talk about diluting, and that's part of the philosophy that Nathan has. He's a very economical guy. If you notice, the Noodlers bottles are absolutely filled to the brim. The reason he does that is he wants to put as much ink in those bottles as possible. He believes that filling them to the brim is just part of that economy. He doesn't want to waste any space. He chose that kind of square looking bottle because it doesn't waste any space when you have it packaged. If you notice, his boxes are very thin, they're very compact, they're very, you know, the amount of ink that he fits into those bottles is incredibly compact for shipping purposes and all that kind of stuff, storage and all that, you know, on the distribution and retailing side. So he's able to give you kind of the biggest bang for your buck, you know, all the way down the distribution chain, if you will. And so part of that economy, he believes, is to dilute, or not dilute, but to keep the inks as saturated as he can, based on the dye and the formulas and stuff like that, so that not only do people just like using a lot of people like, especially here in the US, a lot of people like using really saturated colors because they're very punchy and stuff like that. But if you don't want it to be that saturated, if you want it to flow smoother and not have issues with, you know, potential issues with clogging and stuff like that, you can go ahead and dilute the ink yourself to whatever degree you feel you need to, and then you can have a more watered down ink like some of the, you know, J.R. Bonds or Watermans or, you know, more traditional fountain pen inks that you may have. And, you know, some of the purists will just chastise Nathan and his philosophy for doing that, saying that, you know, his ink causes problems and blah, blah, blah. And Nathan says, just freaking water it down and you can use it to whatever you want. You know, it's the same kind of thing. So that's part of the philosophy that Nathan has with the Noodlers inks. So that said, I don't have any specific recipes. Nathan doesn't give any specific recipes because it's really based on what you want. So if you want it to be as punchy and saturated as possible, just use the ink as is. In fact, if you wanted to just unscrew the cap and leave it sitting there, water could evaporate out and you could actually have more of a concentration if you really wanted to, but I wouldn't recommend doing that intentionally. Usually, it's good to dilute it about 10%, you know. That 10%, usually you'll get a little bit better flow and you won't notice a drastic change in color. Maybe slightly, a little bit watered down, but it's not going to change it too drastically, especially with the more saturated colors. When you start to get more towards like the 25% dilution, that's when you can start to notice a significant lightening of the color and stuff. Going to 50%, you'll really notice a difference. I usually wouldn't recommend going more than 50% on any of the inks, but you know, it's your ink. You can experiment and do whatever you want. I would recommend experimenting in small batches. That way you're not diluting an entire bottle, and then if you don't like it, you know, what are you going to do? I guess you could leave it. If you dilute it and you are not happy, it's gone too far, I guess you could leave the ink just kind of sitting out for a while and let some water evaporate out of it. That's going to be a very inexact way of doing things. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend that unless you just get to that point and you've got no other way to go about it. So experiment in small volumes, you know, get some sample vials, maybe use an ink syringe that you can get kind of a precise amount you can do on kind of a per milliliter basis. You know, it would be pretty easy to do, you know, like a 5 milliliter sample with putting like a half a milliliter to dilute 10%. And it's always best to use distilled water. You don't have to, but distilled water has all of the minerals and stuff that are removed out of the water. It's just plain water. That's the best stuff to use. That's what's used when they make ink, because if you have minerals and stuff, it can react and gunk up your pens if you got really hard water where you are. So if you know you have really filtered water and it's not a big deal, go for it. You know, you can use bottled water and that would pretty much be okay. But if you have distilled water handy, it's not. I think you can only buy it in gallon jugs even. So you may not even want to buy just like a huge jug of ink just to get a few milliliters for diluting your ink. So, you know, if you have to, just use whatever, you know, filtered water that you have handy. All right, coming along, question 18 here. We'll see. I don't know how I'm doing on my battery. Okay, I'm doing okay. All right, Hardy P on Facebook. I have a theory that the plastic in the pens with the funky smell lets water evaporate out of the ink. Am I crazy? It seems all my Noodlers pens lose ink. Is there another explanation? It's probably just me. Well, Hardy, I empathize. You're not the only ones having an evaporating issue out of these pens. However, it has nothing to do with the material of the pen or the smell or anything like that. That's just purely a coincidence. So in that respect, you are crazy. I'm just kidding. So yeah, it has to do with the fact that these are flex nib pens and the fact that the feed on these pens is wide open. Hey, buddy. My son's right at the door. I've got a glass door in my office. Hi, I'm shooting a video. Can you come back later? I'm shooting a video. Okay. My son's 4. He wants a ball that I have in my office here. I have my kids at work with me. I don't know if you knew that, but anyway, I'm surprised I don't get interrupted in more videos actually, but anyway. So yeah, it has nothing to do with the type of material that the pen's made of. It has to do with the design. And these flex nibs require massive amounts of ink when you're flexing them out. And because of that, the feed is very open, it's very wet, and the pens are more prone to drying out because of how open and wet these pens are. So one thing that you can do to kind of help with that, and by the way, it's worse in the wintertime too, when the relative humidity in the air is very low. It can also be worse in like the peak of the summer if you got your air conditioning blasting all the time. That can also decrease the humidity in the air and dry out your pen as well. The lower the level of humidity, the more your pens will dry out. Some things you can do to combat that is you can store it in a plastic bag, especially if you're not going to be using the pen all that often. If you use it like once a week or something like that, store it in like a little Ziploc snack bag or something like that, and that'll help a lot to keep the pen from drying out. The Noodlers pens, they don't have like a fitted insert inside there to keep the nib, completely sealed up or anything. So if it did, that would probably help, but that's the situation we're in. It has to do with more the design of the pen than about the material. Scott B on Facebook, do you think you will ever collaborate with Nathan Tardiff again to create another exclusive ink like Liberty's Elysium? A new exclusive color would be interesting, but I think it would be wise to try and revise Liberty's Elysium as an even more bulletproof true blue. Let's be honest, Liberty's Elysium is a beautiful blue ink, but its bulletproofness isn't up to par compared to Upper Ganges or even Platinum Carbon Blue. Okay, fair enough, Scott. I already beat you to the punch though, because if you look back, way back to when it was first developed, we actually already did that. We reformulated it and we tried it out. What we found was that, well, first let me go, the whole inspiration behind Liberty's Elysium, aside from the whole historical aspect and all that kind of stuff with Patrick Henry and all that, the whole motivation behind the color and the properties of the ink was to basically get my favorite Noodlers color, which was Noodlers Blue, to get that color of blue with as permanent a properties as I possibly could. So I did not want to sacrifice the color for the sake of the properties. And the reason is because there were a lot of bulletproof blues already, specifically darker ones. You had luxury blue and periwinkle and like stuff like that that are chalkier, flatter looking, very permanent, but not the best performers necessarily, and you sacrificed on the vibrancy and certain things about the ink that I really liked in Noodlers Blue. So you specifically asked about Platinum Carbon Blue. That is a pigmented ink. I've talked to Nathan, he's not interested in making pigmented inks. It's a whole different bird, so forget that one. And even still, Platinum Pigmented Blue is not as vibrant as Liberty's Elysium, I will say. Upper Ganges, okay. Upper Ganges was an ink that Nathan had formulated and stopped making. We actually convinced him to bring it back. So we've got it as exclusive now at Goulet because we wanted, that was a response that we did about a year ago probably from today. I don't remember the exact date, but we brought it back because there were some people who wanted a more bulletproof Noodlers Blue or a more bulletproof Liberty's Elysium, if you will. So he had already made Upper Ganges several years ago, and we helped to kind of revive that and bring it back because of the demand that people had for that. Now that said, comparing Upper Ganges next to Liberty's Elysium, you sacrifice. You sacrifice permanence for vibrancy of color. And that's exactly what happened when we did Liberty's Elysium. We actually did a video. Go back on YouTube, go to my channel, the Goulet Pen Company, and look at Noodler's Liberty's Elysium reformulation ... That's the name of the video. So that was basically, we came out with Liberty's Elysium, said, hey, we got a bulletproof blue. Nathan told us, hey, this is bulletproof, and by the standards that he had set, it was bulletproof. And people got it and said, hey, the vibrant blue washes away and it's left with a flatter looking blue. And it's like, well, that is permanent. Like, that will not wash away. So it's got about half of that component to it that is a permanent blue that will not wash away. The vibrant blue, though, does kind of wash away because that component that gives it that vibrancy is not a permanent dye. So we basically went back to Nathan and said, people are asking for a more permanent version of this ink. And the call of making it bulletproof was in question. So we went back with him and we said, Nathan, can we reformulate this and try and make stuff? He had made actually several different variants of it with different degrees of bulletproofness, if you will. And basically what we found was that the compromise was between permanence and color vibrancy. And as you got more permanence, the color got flatter, it got darker, it got chalkier, and it was not nearly what excited us about Liberty's Elysium. And so Upper Ganges essentially falls kind of on that scale. It's a flatter, chalkier color that is more permanent than Liberty's Elysium. So and we found that. So if you look, and we actually gave people the chance to vote. I gave a video, the Liberty's Elysium reformulation is where I'm comparing the original formula of Liberty's Elysium with a reformulated, more permanent version. And what I found was that the trade-off between the color and the vibrancy, and the color and the permanence, I just put it out there and said, what do you guys want? You tell me, you vote. And I did another video called Noodler's Liberty's Elysium Results that basically showed that people did not think it was worth the sacrifice. So we kept the original formula of Liberty's Elysium, and voila, that's how it is today. Now, you did ask me about, would we create another exclusive ink? We have talked to Nathan about that. It's a trade-off because he's as I've mentioned before, he's an incredibly busy guy. And I always have to trade off, like, do I want to bother him essentially with formulating this new ink at the cost of producing the ink and the pens that are already in kind of a short supply? Because he's one guy, so it's a trade-off. He's working as much and as efficiently as he can. So whenever I ask him for this kind of stuff, it's always at a little bit of a trade-off. So I have to be very patient with him. We've talked about some ideas for inks, and I'm sure that we'll be doing more in the future, guaranteed. And so that's really kind of where it stands. I don't have any timelines for any of that kind of stuff. We have some ideas, and I think we've got some kind of cool stuff, but it all is just dependent on what Nathan is able to line up. There you go. So chugging along here, I've got a couple extra questions. What's my battery life like? It's getting low. I've got 11 minutes left. We'll see. All right. This is a long one today. Adam V on Facebook said, I cleaned my Nib Creeper for the first time the other day. I noticed that if I manipulate the piston with the nib up, so the water was flush with the piston plunger, so the piston is on the bottom and the water is sitting over top of it, I could see air bubbles coming up past the plunger when it moved. Is it really supposed to do that? Not necessarily. It's not really supposed to do that. It's supposed to be a tight seal there, and it sounds like you don't have a tight seal. As long as it's not leaking, it's not really causing you a problem. But yeah, still ideally, there is a double seal on those pens, so it's not necessarily such a terrible thing, but really you don't want bubbles there. So there's a gap in that piston seal somewhere. It's allowing air to come up, and you don't necessarily want that. So I don't know how old your pen is. I don't have that information, Adam, but There's a couple options for you. The first one, if you have any silicone grease handy, it's always a good thing to have around. If you don't have any, I recommend getting some because it's just handy for all kinds of different, greasing up your pistons and all that, different parts of all your pens. But anyway, if you have some of that, then you can put some of that on that seal, on that piston seal. That pen disassembles relatively easily. You can put some of that grease on that seal, and that will pretty much take care of it. It will be a barrier for air or ink or anything to come through there, and you don't really have to change much beyond that. You may need to reapply every so often, but it's not a big effort to do that. The other option is you could actually replace that nylon seal with rubber O-rings. Nathan has a video on doing that. That when the pen first came out, which was like 3.5 years ago or something. But yeah, it's a fairly easy process, and we actually sell the replacement O-rings for the Nib Creeper pen, so you can look for that there. They're pretty inexpensive. Steve B on Facebook, when are the acrylic Conrads being restocked? Sometime soon. It's the same situation with the acrylic Conrads as it is with the ebonite ones that I mentioned earlier. It all depends on Nathan's supply, what he's able to do. He's a busy man. He has a pendulum swing between when he makes ink and when he makes pens, or coordinates pens or whatever. I know there's more of a dry supply with the acrylic and the ebonite Conrads because he currently is doing all the heat setting for those pens personally. So that is taking a lot of his time. I know he's in the process of trying to get some help with that component, but as he's told me before, training people to do heat setting like that is difficult, especially because I'm sure he's a pretty meticulous guy, so it can probably be hard there, but it should be getting better sometime soon. I don't have an exact date for when anything's coming, but it should get better. Chris H on Facebook said, how do you increase or decrease the flow of ink in the flex pens? To increase, you can open up the feed channel or the fins. You can do that using an X-Acto knife. That would probably be the best way, or a utility knife some people have used. It can't be undone though, so make sure you know what you're doing. And I don't have a lot of spare feeds, and they're not anything you can buy, so just make sure you're being careful there. You can play with the nib and the feed and how not the orientation in terms of rotation, but how far out the nib and the feed are in the pen and in the relation to each other can kind of manipulate the flow a little bit. So try that out first. And then to decrease it is a little bit tougher. I mentioned earlier you can put a little bit of silicone grease on the fins, not in the channel on top, but on the fins that go around the feed to help with that. Do that on the back of the feed where it's kind of sitting in the grip of the pen. That can help to decrease the flow a little bit, but basically if you're having any flow issues, the first thing I would recommend, clean the thing out thoroughly and then try heat setting it, like I did in my heat setting a Noodler's ebonite feed video. Patrick D on Facebook said, love the look and feel of my Conrad acrylic. I don't love the plasticky smell. Suggestions? The acrylic Conrad, if you think that smells, try the other ones. That's acrylic acetate like a lot of other pen brands have. I personally don't think they really smell that much. So just keep it away from your nose. I mean, it should be the kind of thing that goes away pretty quickly, but if maybe you're more sensitive to smells than I am, but acrylic acetate doesn't really smell that strong, in my opinion. There's really nothing you can do to get rid of that smell. Just keep the pen around for a little while, and after a couple of weeks, it should get better, but there's no real trick you can do to get rid of that smell. Pavel V on Facebook, how to highlight a text written with Noodler's Black without smearing. So I explained a little bit earlier how Noodler's Black is a cellulose reactive ink. It's got to soak into the paper before it truly becomes permanent. So if there is any ink that hasn't soaked in, then it is going to smear, especially when you're literally wiping another ink across it. So that said, the paper is going to matter quite a bit, and the amount of time that you've given it to dry is going to matter a lot. So if you've got somewhat of an ink-resistant paper and you're putting the ink down and then highlighting over top of it in a relatively short period of time, that is not going to be as ideal, and you'll probably have smearing issues. I don't have any magical answer for you there, other than maybe to try a pigmented ink like platinum carbon black or something as an alternative, because that dries more on the surface of the paper, and so it's a little more flexible in terms of being used on heavily sized papers. So if you have the ability to play around with it on different papers, see if that makes a difference. If you don't have a choice of what paper you're using, maybe try a sample of platinum carbon black and see if that helps you out. Michael L. on Facebook said, is there a Noodler's Vibrant Purple equivalent to J.R. Bond's Violet Pensée? The two that I found that are the closest, though they're a little bit darker and more saturated, you would expect them to be more saturated. Noodler's Purple and Noodler's North African Violet. North African Violet is a water-resistant ink. So purple would be more of a conventional ink like Violet Pensée. One thing you could try is doing Noodler's Purple. It's a similar shade of purple, but it's a little more saturated. You could try diluting it. I would bet if you dilute it maybe 15 to 20%, it would be a pretty close match to Violet Pensée. And here we go, question number 26. I can't believe I fit all this in this time. This is pretty impressive, that especially that you've sat here and watched it this whole time. I don't know, I don't think I've ever flipped this thing so many times before, but thank you for sticking with me this whole time. Last question I have is, Nathan Tardiff, will he ever appear again on your videos? Maybe not live like in Right Time, but maybe to answer some questions like in a Q&A video. Will we ever see him besides his hands? And you've got some characters written as your name here, and I appreciate you telling me how to say your name, Lean Li An. Hopefully I said that right. So yes, Lean Li An, I would say, yeah, I'm gonna do my absolute best. He already kind of verbally agreed to doing it. It's just lining up the time and the technical abilities to be able to record him, not in video form, but in an audio form. It's kind of like this mysterious thing. I don't know that he ever really intentionally doesn't want to show his face. He's got kind of this Wizard of Oz kind of thing going on now with the the man behind the curtain thing. He's very much like a Willy Wonka type guy. Yeah, it's like, how does he make all this ink? He must have Oompa Loompas, helping him out somewhere. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know that I'll ever be able to get you to see anything besides his hands. But I am going to do my best to try to get him in an audio format if I'm able to. If I'm not able to, I will at least try to talk to him and get some, quick summaries of answers to some of these other questions that I got for next week. So I'm going to leave it off with you there. So that said, if you've got any other questions that you want me to specifically ask to Nathan, I will not guarantee at all that I can get you the right answer, because Nathan's the kind of guy, I'll ask a question and literally I'll, like 20 minutes later, I'll be like, sorry, Nathan, can you answer my question again? He's so smart and he's got so much information packed into his brain. It's hard for him to be concise. He just goes so deep into whatever he's talking about. You can just tell that he's just packed full of information. And you can tell that if you watch any of his videos. You can just tell he's just full of information. It's just who he is. You have to embrace it. I admire the guy like nothing else. He's a great guy, very genuine man, but conciseness is not his forte. And actually, he's done several videos on heat setting ebonite feeds and stuff. I want to say the video that he did with heat setting an ebonite feed was something like 47 minutes long. I ended up putting mine into about 3 minutes, and it was funny because before I did the video, I wanted to kind of just get his blessing. I sent it to him, and he just raved about it. He says he just could not believe how concisely and simply and how well it was put together. He just absolutely gushed about it, and so that was pretty cool to get that. But he's a cool guy. So anyway, that said, that's my plan for next week. If you have any other things, I may have just gotten cut off in this video. If I didn't get cut off, then we'll see. I think the battery's about to die. But anyway, if you have any other questions, reach out to all the various channels, YouTube, InkNouveau, email, all these other things, Facebook, whatever it is, and find me. And I will do my best to ask Nathan whatever I can. I already have enough questions for next week that I think I could literally ask him like 2 questions and probably fill up an hour. But that said, I'll ask him as much as I can. So that'll be the plan for next week, which is going to be March 28th. So there you have it. Hope you have a good week. Hope you enjoyed this video here. And as always, right on.